Hey guys, we're back. I'm Naomi, and we've got Kristine van Dooren here, the author of the podcast Finding Purpose. And this is our second episode of our new series. I'm saying our, but it's yours, Mom. It's your episode, your new series, Kristine, called Conversations with Kristine van Dooren. And I have the honor, as your oldest daughter, you have 5 daughters, to be interviewing you. We swapped roles. Usually you're telling your story on your own, and I want to ask questions and get to know you more and give our listeners the opportunity to be able to kind of peek behind the scenes and kind of hear about your process of making this podcast and much more. So,
okay.
in this episode, we want to talk a little bit about the process of making the episodes and how it's been kind of a part of your life in these last months. It's almost a year. And then in the coming episode, we'll talk about more personal questions of, I want to ask you questions out of my perspective of certain things you've experienced and what certain things that you tell us in your podcast were like for you in detail. So today, how have your days been filled in this last almost 1 year in preparing this podcast? I mean, do you just need one evening a week, or how's this been taking over your life?
Yeah, it has been taking over my life. And it's interesting, an interesting season for me because seems like I have less to do than I used to. I used to have a much more busy schedule, and I still have time for family and grandkids and everything. But what I have experienced, once I started in the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm just going to read what I wrote, originally in English. And I realized it has to be more personal. And so once I started like talking like, well, I felt like this and this happened, and remembering things about my husband who's been gone for many years now, I started realizing that that's really the depth of my story is the things, that you feel and experience. And it's taken me on an emotional roller coaster, I would say.
Imagine.
Because and the weird thing is, so many people say to me, how can you remember those things? And I'm like, I didn't know I could remember those things. And so once you start going back, 45, 50 years ago and looking at photographs and reading things, it's like it takes you back.
Yeah.
And my life has been busy, 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 so many years, raising a family and 10 grandchildren, always, go, go, go. And you don't think about the past, and you don't think how things started. And so, yeah, it's been really an adventure. I had no idea I was getting myself into this.
Wow. For me, it's really special that you've been doing this because I'm a mom now, and my daughter's the age that you were when you start your first episode, between 19 and 21. And it's really interesting for me to kind of like being able to hear out of your perspective what was going on in your life and what you were thinking and everything. And then watching my daughter, it helps me actually to have more understanding and empathy and patience and trying to relate to her and what she's going through. And I don't know if you listened, our listeners, if you heard our last episode of Conversations with Kristine, we were talking about that. My daughter, Adina, is the one who suggested you do this podcast. And yeah, right now she's, gone in Australia, traveling around. And I'm always thinking, wow, she's kind of in your footsteps. I never did something like that. And she actually reminds me of you a lot. And may I quick say on a side note, in this episode, this is like my favorite color that I'm wearing right now. And I can see watching your camera that you've got that blanket in the background. For all of you guys watching this video, she has a blanket that you crocheted when I was a baby in California in the teepee, and you still have it. And it's this color. I just realized that. Maybe that's
Purple,
maybe it's your fault that this is my favorite color. Okay, let's get back to business. So you've been on this roller coaster ride and you had no idea that you could remember all this. And you've had all this time. I mean, like I said, I think it's been like 9 or 10 months by now that you've been doing this. And you're reminiscing basically and experience kind of, are you kind of reliving certain things? Is it like
Definitely.
anxious again when you remember certain stories, or make you fall in love again with my dad when you're talking about how you were meeting him? What has that been like?
Well, the interesting thing is when you get older, you can either just be busy with life onward, but when you look back, of course, you have the wisdom and the perspective that you didn't have, when you were 20 or 25 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've been actually quite shocked at, like, I was like, what? I was thinking, like, what were you thinking when you were 19 or 20, all the
Yeah.
dumb or foolish things, but having fun, it's all about having fun and adventure. And my poor parents, and like for you, your daughter's traveling across the world, but
Yeah.
you can call her and video
I
her.
know.
I was in West Berlin and my parents were in California, and that was not possible. We had to wait on each other's letters,
Incredible. How long would it take for a letter to like make it over the pond?
the pond. Well, a week, 10 days, something like that. And we always wrote on airmail paper. So all of my filed letters from those days, it's on airmail paper, like really thin.
Incredible.
Because it was cheaper.
Right. And how long would it take you to write a letter? I mean, nowadays people just quick grab their cell phone and send an audio.
Yeah, see, no, you would write, well, depending on what kind of person you were and who you were writing to. I mean, my mother told me later when I was living in Berlin, so I was 20, they didn't expect that I was going to stay there when I went traveling. And she said, oh, you wrote terrible, depressing letters.
Oh, no.
Of all
Oh,
the bad things, and I was living in West Berlin in the winter, and then all the things that happened, just like, but those letters I don't have. She didn't save. She didn't save her letters over the years, and I didn't save the letters she wrote to me in Berlin. But my mother-in-law saved letters. So those are the ones that I have.
Incredible. And there's also letters that Dad wrote, right? Is that a lot of the letters that we're talking about here?
Yeah. For example, I have them all here filed away, like a
So
whole
many.
huge. Oh yeah, I've got like 50 letters or so.
Oh,
And the very first letter I have is really amazing. And it's the draft that he wrote to me when he was 18. We met in West Berlin. Then I went on traveling, and I was quite sad about that. And then I wrote back to him from the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. And I said, what would you think if I came back to Germany? Or, yeah, I think I'm in love with you. I could get a job. And he wrote back to me, and a week later, we were back in London at this hostel place. The letter arrived, and that letter I have now. And it's not because I saved it at the time, of course, but his mother saved all of his things, and it was in his, things in his room. And, found it many years later.
this is incredible. Do you
Yeah, it's not only like if you have a letter, for example, here's something he wrote where you can see, his style of writing, and he always did these little cartoony figures. And so you see the personality. And
how old was he when he wrote that?
Oh, this particular thing he wrote, well, he was in his 20s. In this picture he's writing, we have 2 children, we have 2 daughters now.
Okay.
But it's what's very like kind of emotional or special is to actually be holding something that he had in his hand. And,
Wow.
and imagine like, what was he thinking about when he was writing this? He's saying, with much joy, we're so excited. We have 2 daughters now. And that's the way it is with all the letters. It's like I spend a lot of time reading through the letters, and then like I'm learning to meet this guy that I didn't even really know, like parts of him that I didn't know by
Wow.
reading these letters that he wrote.
So is it also kind of romantic in a way?
Well, yeah, I mean, the most of the letters that I have, he was writing to his mother about
Yeah.
our life in California. But I have a lot of cards. I mean, I
Mm.
always save cards. Our whole life, he was writing me birthday cards and
Yeah.
love notes, and wrote songs for me.
Wow.
And but like I have in my memory this 18-year-old from the perspective of a 19-year-old, that we met and fell in love kind of pretty quickly in West Berlin. And we didn't know each other. We didn't know our backgrounds. And he didn't talk a lot about his family or his feelings towards his parents.
Mhm.
We had some kind of deep conversations, but so much more that I've read, and also listening to tapes that he's made over the years. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like falling in love again, or also having more um also sadness
Yeah.
about his background, because I didn't realize he had such a sad, troubling background as a child because his parents divorced.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fascinating. It's just really fascinating.
I mean, you guys have such an amazing love story, and it's lasted, all the way up to this day, and been such an inspiration, for all of us 5 daughters. And I think that we are all happily married is, the fruit of what you guys, presented to us. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a gift, such a grace. When you
One thing about talking about Thomas and the letters and everything, um, because he's gone, he passed away in 99. Um, it's like some people say, isn't that too personal or whatever? And I always feel like, no, I mean, he always put his life out there to other people, everybody he met.
That's
He
true.
loved people, and he was always very, simple and honest and
Yeah,
forthright. And so I'm kind of, I'm following kind of in his example.
that's true.
and and I mean, I do have the freedom to talk about whatever I want, the good and the bad.
Yeah,
um I mean, it's very different perspective, speaking from the point of being a widow for over 20 years,
yeah,
so.
incredible. Um, yeah, I'm at a loss for a moment here, thinking about Gone. And
Yeah.
when you in these last few months, when you've been working on this podcast, how long do you like what how does your everyday life look like when you're preparing, like, because I think you mentioned something to me about researching about those days period, like in the cities, and the music that was going on, and remembering. Can you tell me a little bit about what that has been doing with you, of
Yeah.
diving back into the 70s?
Yeah. Yeah. um let's see how to start. First of all, it's kind of one thing, the fact that I was like 18, 19, 20. I
Yeah,
grew up, in the summer of love hippie movement in near San Francisco. I was at all the rock concerts of the famous singers.
mm-hmm.
That's why my sister and I went to Europe, was to go to rock festivals. And I was very much into the spiritual aspect. I read all kinds of, Indian books and philosophies, and I started
Yeah,
doing yoga and all of this. Um, but it's like I have a whole different perspective of that, now that I've lived my life and where that all took me. And
Mhm.
but when I started to talk about it, I realized, oh, I need to get back there in the past, because so much it was just like done and gone. I never thought about those things. I haven't thought about those things, since 1970s.
Yeah.
And so I looked a lot, on the internet and YouTube, and looked at old photographs and tried to get into the zone and the whole vibe of the thing, and it's all about the music. That's how I started the first episode. It's all about the music.
Oh yeah, that's right. And do you still listen to the music of those days?
I didn't used to, but I have been the last few months. And the thing is, many people say you'll hear a song from your past, and then you remember where you were and what you were feeling. That's really true.
Wow.
And so when I first, so I was writing our story, and then I was pulling out the old photographs and thought, well, okay, I need to start showing people on Instagram what it looked like so they can imagine it, not only me talking about it, but see the pictures.
Yeah.
And then I found, like, on Instagram and Facebook, you can add music. So then I was looking up, the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead and Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Led Zeppelin and all of those concerts. And so the combination, just for me, my experience doing this
Yeah.
was put a picture, of my hippie garb and my long hair and everything, and then the music of Crosby, Stills and Nash, for example. Then you start remembering even more things. It's unusual, but it's fun.
Yeah.
And it really, really helps me. So I listen to that kind of music, during the week, depending on which stories I'm writing about. Also the Beatles. I hadn't listened to the Beatles music, forever. And I remember all the words of all the songs.
Do you
Turn it on, and
remember?
I'll
Do you remember
turn
that
it on.
two of us went to a Paul McCartney concert?
Right, we did.
Yeah, and when I was a teenager, I wasn't listening to the Beatles that much, and it was fascinating to me because that was probably like the 80s when the two of us went there, and he sang for 2.5 hours straight. And I recognized every song. Even though
Oh,
it was
that's
like
interesting.
his songs are so universal and have made the rounds so much and were so
Yeah.
good that even
He's
though
still
I
doing
wasn't,
concerts.
yeah, I
He's in
know.
his early 80s, and somebody said he does 2.5 to 3 hour concerts.
It's incredible. And I mean, how old are you now? You're a little bit older than 70. And
Yeah.
and you're also still going strong, and being creative and taking us into your story and putting all this effort in. I mean, I'm pretty amazed. I know, we talk and we can have conversations, and I hear that you're like every day you're working on the next episode, researching, going through the pictures, preparing the Instagram posts, writing out your text, and writing out your you put so much work into your episodes, like that they have their own story, each of them. And I think that's pretty incredible and inspiring for myself, when I get older. And also it seems to me like it must be quite emotional to be like reliving all of this stuff, and yet it's your now time,
Yeah.
so it's so far away,
Yeah.
but yet it's you today
Yeah.
doing all of these things and sharing, and so it's so real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible.
I mean, it feels real to me. I mean, sometimes I feel like, oh, this is just too much, you know. How did I get here, And but at the same time, I'm discovering, new things about, who I was in the past and how my life developed, and also with, Thomas.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's and the other thing that's, I feel, challenging, even maybe more so than learning how to speak, with a microphone, is the writing. Because when I wrote my German book, there was a lot going on in our house. You guys were recording a CD. We would take turns being in the studio, you guys recording, Debbie producing, and me writing the book, then you
Yeah.
translating.
Yeah.
And it was all done kind of quickly, but I was writing the whole story up until year 2000 or whatever.
Yeah.
But like I never considered myself a writer. I never planned on writing a book. And so what I do now is I listen to a lot of interviews with songwriters, sometimes authors. I watch and listen to things that are from people who are writers and read articles. And so I feel like I'm learning to be a writer and loving it.
Yeah.
And trying to improve, my vocabulary, which I feel is kind of limited in English. But
Yeah. I mean, after all of these years of being in Germany.
yeah, but I feel like what I experience is, or what I hope is, that people listening to what I've written and how I'm talking about it, that it's kind of an experience for them, like it is listening to a song. A song is somebody's personal experience, and the music, kind of highlights it. And it makes you happy, or you want to dance, or it makes you sad and cry, and all these emotions.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I go through in writing. And that's what I hope comes through in what I write and the way I speak about it.
Yeah. Have you had moments of, where you would have to break down crying or laughing?
All the time.
Yeah.
Almost every day. Really. It's
like
crazy.
Also crying?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's crazy because I'm not the crying type. But like, even if I'm just listening to music and sometimes I actually have music going in the background while I'm writing.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like, to keep me in this feeling, like I'm trying to write with feeling, not just
technical.
the story and but yeah. And then sometimes I remember funny stories of crazy things we did, or your dad was a very funny guy. And also in our hippie days, we did very, very crazy stuff. And even when I was written it and recording at Debbie's studio, sometimes we both would have to laugh out loud. We'd have to like pause the microphone, oh man, that was crazy. You really did that. Or you
Tell me a little bit more about that. So Debbie, who's Debbie, for some of the listeners who maybe aren't completely in the story? Who's Debbie? And tell me about the first time you recorded your first episode.
Yeah, that was back, quite a few months ago. You're the youngest daughter of the family, and she grew up since she was very young with you, singing, and is a singer now and a vocal coach. And she has a studio in her house, which is not too far from where I live. And so she offered to record me. And even that, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I visited her in her studio and listened to her music, but never imagined sitting there with the microphone in front of my face. And but I mean, it's amazing because she's very busy that she offered, to start recording these, recording these episodes. So she gave me a lot of tips as we went along. And sometimes, I would be reading something and it would make me cry, because of, it usually has to do with my husband, who's not here anymore.
Yeah.
But it can be all kinds of things. And so I've kind of taken her on the journey with me. She is the first person to hear the episode, and listen to it. And then she does the final edit and adds your music, which I love. And so yeah.
Adina and I, my eldest daughter and myself, we've sometimes listened to some of your episodes together, which is incredible then, because you're talking out of the perspective of a 20-year-old, which is her age. And I'm listening from the perspective of your daughter and remembering that I was a baby then. And sometimes, I'm in your stories and we've cried together. We'll be like, but I think I just want to say thank you that you're putting all this work into it, and thank you for giving us a little bit of insight in the behind the scenes story, also for our listeners, because it's inspiring. I feel like it's inspiring to understand our mothers or our daughters, our different generations. Also, maybe for all of us as we're listening, to also sometimes understand a little bit more what we're going through ourselves, just by hearing you being so open about, and like you said, the good and the bad, sharing so openly, and also about your faith. So it's really encouraging and strengthening, not just entertaining. And so I just, want to say thank you, because it's really worth the effort that you're putting into it. I know you're putting a lot of work into it. And if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't heard Kristine van Dooren's story yet, called Find Your Purpose, by now I think it's around about 36 episodes. You definitely should listen, but definitely go from the start, episode 1,
Yeah.
70s in Northern California. And God bless you. Our listeners, God bless you. And Mom, God bless you. And
Thank you.
I want to just remind you guys all to definitely keep your eyes out for the next episode, where we're going to get much more personal with Kristine, and I'm going to hit you with more personal questions.
Okay.
And talk to you soon, listen to you soon, see you soon. All the best.
Okay. Bye for now.